The Law Commission, which advises the government, is recommending the introduction of pre- and post-nuptial agreements that would enable married couples and civil partners to determine how their property is shared if their relationship breaks down. Well, at the moment, these documents can be taken into consideration, but they're not legally binding. Our legal affairs correspondent, Clive Coleman, has more.
There was a time when discussions between bride and groom about their respective financial assets before marriage was, well, just not the done thing. And it remains difficult to protect assets when separating. Eric Tansley went through a long and difficult 3-year divorce.
I'd inherited a considerable sum of money from my father a few years ago and endeavoured to have that protected, but there proved to be no way of doing so, and so it's just in the pot and it's been dissipated.
Under the current law, couples can make pre- and post-nuptial agreements, setting out how their assets are to be split on divorce or on the dissolution of a civil partnership. The courts may follow these agreements, but they're not binding, so couples can't be certain that they'll be upheld. Well, now, the Law Commission wants that to change.
We're recommending the introduction of a new form of agreement called the qualifying nuptial agreement, which will enable couples to make enforceable agreements about the way that they share their property on divorce or the dissolution of civil partnership.
To be binding marital agreements, both partners must have had legal advice, disclosed all relevant information about their finances, and the agreement must be made at least 28 days before the wedding or civil partnership. Critically, the agreements would allow people to ring-fence money and assets. But some oppose any strengthening of prenuptial financial agreements.
What concerns us is that prenups could support the wealthy and support the strong, whereas at the moment marriage really is deeply equalising and it supports the vulnerable. And anything that would further undermine the rights of the vulnerable and the weak and the poor would bother us.
The government will now consider the Law Commission's recommendation that they become binding. Clive Coleman, BBC News.
Well, let's discuss whether prenup agreements are good or a bad idea. And joining me to do that is Harry Benson from the Marriage Foundation, who is broadly against the idea of prenups, and a divorce lawyer, Catherine Thomas from Vardags, who is against them. Her firm was first in the UK to get a court to acknowledge a prenup. Thank you very much for joining us. Catherine, obviously you're for prenups. Is that because it just puts money in your pocket?
No, in fact, it puts less money in divorce lawyers' pockets, because the idea behind them is if you have an enforceable prenuptial agreement that is, properly thought through, then there'll be less arguments when it comes to divorce and less need for divorce lawyers.
But you charge them to get the prenup done in the first place?
But not as much as it takes to have a fully contested divorce at the other side.
I mean, aren't solicitors at the moment in divorce proceedings, aren't they meant to try and bring both parties together in the same room to try and sort it out between themselves rather than creating a fight between each other? Because people like yourself have long been accused of making a lot of money out of divorces by winding couples up against each other.
I personally feel it is my personal obligation to minimise the conflict in situations like that, and I think a lot of my colleagues would feel the same. But in reality, very often both couples are taking opposing positions on things, and the only way that they can sort them out is through litigation for a court deciding. Now, the benefit of prenups is that they decide themselves at the beginning. It gives an important amount of autonomy, and then that's. I think that is better than having the divorce lawyers and the courts decide at the end.
Harry, I'd like you to respond to that. I mean, fair enough point, isn't it? It saves pain, possibly saves money as well, to have that agreement in place should the marriage break down. And we all know marriages can break down.
I think for a small minority of people, there may well be a case for signing something like a prenup before you go into marriage, because you bring in something from the past, it may be, or something that you want to protect, and it may be an inheritance, or it may be some shed load of money that you happen to have made in the city or whatever. And I can see the case for some people wanting it, but I think for the vast majority of us, I think it's highly unlikely that you're going to get down on one knee and make your delicious wedding proposal and fill the place with romance, and then after you've said, "Darling, will you marry me?" and spend the rest of your life with me. And by the way, please sign here on the dotted line.
Come on, Harry, you're not going to do that straight away, are you?
Well, maybe not. You leave a decent interval.
And also that a lot of modern couples now, as my grandparents like to put it, live together before they get married. They've already got financial arrangements that need to be discussed at some point anyway.
There's a fundamental difference here, though, between... I mean, there is a case for minority. And it's good that the law will begin to recognise that a little more, which it should have done in the first place. But for the vast majority of us, you're making a plan for a future. You're setting out how you're going to manage your life together. And you've got dreams and ambitions, and it's mostly about success. That's what you're thinking of. So starting to think about divorce from day one is not a good idea. One of the more robust findings in social science is that thinking about divorce leads people, or makes people more likely to actually go ahead and do divorce.
Catherine, I mean, Harry is possibly a bit of a romantic there, but I mean, he's got a point, hasn't he? You know, nobody wants to enter into marriage thinking about divorce, unless you're a solicitor that's going to make some money out of it.
I actually personally think it can be a very healthy process for a couple to go through, the prenup process.
Thinking of the end?
No, just talking about their future lives. What do they expect? What do they want? Where are they going to live? Are they going to have children? Are they both going to continue to work? These are all discussions that you have to have when you're signing up to a prenup, because you have to some extent, crystal ball gaze. You have to imagine your future life to work out what would be fair.
But doesn't that keep changing though? Anyway, you have children, you lose your job, you don't have as much savings as perhaps started, or you get more savings, or you have more success.
Yeah,
absolutely. So you've got to keep doing prenups.
Well, some prenups have certain review clauses. So after, for example, 5 years or the birth of a child, you might have a review. If you anticipate having children, then you can draft a prenup accordingly. You know, there's lots of different ways they can be drafted.
But Harry's saying there that it's really just the minority that are going to benefit from that. Most couples aren't super rich. They haven't really got much of an estate to talk about. You're talking of bricks and mortar and maybe just a few savings to tie you over difficult periods or to save up for a holiday.
Well, a lot of people won't want or need them, but as the Law Commission pointed out, for anyone who has got wealth beyond just their needs, if they've got anything beyond their own needs, then they may well look to do this to protect that or to decide what happens. And you know, for a lot of people, as you said, they are marrying older, they've got things they want to protect, they are marrying when they've got children from a previous relationship, they want to ensure that those children receive their pre-acquired wealth.
And Harry, the statistics speak for themselves, don't they? You know, 1 in 3 marriages ends in divorce, and you know, a marriage is a business nowadays. There are two people often working in a marriage, not just one. That there's money coming in from 2 people.
It's definitely the case that plenty of marriages do fail. I mean, far too many, and it's about 40% is the failure rate. You're actually vastly more likely to stay together if you marry than if you don't. But what Catherine's saying about talking about the future and sorting out how you're going to manage your life is, of course, an excellent thing. It's just there are an awful lot better ways of doing it than actually planning on the basis that you might one day split up. Most people want to figure out how they're going to make a success of their relationship rather than deal with a failure. And essentially, for most people, what a prenup is all about is it's saying, how are we going to divide up my money? How am I going to keep my money? Instead of what we should be talking about, which is how are we going to make our commitment work together. So
you would like the government to be considering more ways of keeping marriage together, keeping them successful, courses, consultation perhaps?
I think that when you look at the vast cost of family breakdown, 46 billion a year, it's long overdue for the government to have a decent policy on marriage. And it's definitely the case that the trend away from marriage is the reason why family breakdown has spiralled out of control. We need to be supporting and encouraging marriage. It's great that family lawyers are as pro-marriage as we are, but I think there are better ways of doing this for the vast majority. And there's obviously a case for a prenup for a small minority.
How many people do you think really want a prenup? How many people are going to take advantage of this if it does become legally recognised?
I think more and more will. I mean, initially it's a cultural issue. In certain countries, Germany, France, it's more socially acceptable. It is standard. Generations of families have been entering into them. I think once it becomes socially acceptable here, then over time, more and more people will have them. It'll just be a standard thing. It'll be something you do. And I think that with the Law Commission's recommendations, if this does become law, then it will become more socially acceptable, and then it will increase. But we get several inquiries a week about prenuptial agreements.
Fascinating. Catherine, Harry, many thanks for coming in.